All right, here, quiet on the set. All right, okay. All right, here we go. What is this? The Stone Roadie show number 27.
Yeah, it's 27.
All right, and here we go. Quiet on the set and action.
Welcome to the Stoned Roadie Show with Craig Reed. Of course, Craig Reed is the most famous roadie in rock and roll history, and we won't dispute that he's the most stoned as well. And today we got a special guest on the show, along with a returning guest, Paul Abraham. Andy TANAS is our new guest. And Andy TANAS, familiar to the rock and roll industry. He was in Crocus and Black Oak, Arkansas, and he's been doing a lot of work on the road with several different bands. But kind of cool how he started out as a roadie with Lynyrd Skynyrd and working with Craig. So let's get into some cool stories with Andy TANAS. He's got one particular story about how Ronnie pushed an amplifier over and hit him in the head and sent him to the hospital for some stitches. So he's going to talk about that. And then he's going to talk about some other things, some stories with the bands that he's been with and being on the road. And Craig, why don't you start off with talking about how you met Andy?
Well, it was right at 1975, and it was about a year after I actually started with the band, and we did. I think Andy told me. I thought it was before that, but Andy kind of told me it was during the Torture Tour. A lot of people are familiar with the Torture Tour. We did 88 shows in 95 days, and we had Rock and Roll Audio was our first PA system we had, and Andy was Joe Osborne, who a lot of people are familiar with Joe, who was on the airplane crash. He was the owner of the thing, and we'd used him for a while, and then Andy came aboard, and then the one story we're gonna get into is how Ronnie pushed Alan's amplifier over on Andy's head and gave him a few stitches on the top of his head, and he still carries that wound today on the top of his head. But yeah, there was a story. I haven't talked. Me and Andy been friends since 1975. You know, Jiminy Christmas is almost 50 years, you know, although we haven't talked to each other for 47, but right. You know, but I'd still consider us friends, you know. So
yeah, we asked after that tour, you know.
Yeah, we asked Andy to come on, and especially to tell that story about because all I remember was, well, Andy refreshed my memory and said Chuck come on, got him and said something's wrong over here, and yeah, I'll just that's about what I remember. And then I remember Ronnie going to Andy's room to like apologize, you know, because then I remember they was taking him to the hospital to get stitches, and Ronnie felt kind of bad, you know. And then the next thing I know, it's like Ronnie doesn't want to see Andy out on the road no more because Ronnie heard Andy do a little bit of his. Ronnie went to Andy's room and he got on the guitar and was singing and playing a little bit. And Ronnie said, "Man, you don't need to be out here being a roadie. You need to pursue your career, you know." And God, you know, next thing I know, Andy's gone, and then I hear he's out playing bass with Black Oak, Arkansas, and stuff.
That's the way it happened, pretty much. So
I'm just gonna. This is Andy TANAS, and yeah, well, I'm just going to let him proceed with the conversation here on the Stoned Roadie Show, and then we got Paul Abraham over there, and he's one of our regulars. He's going to be filling in that fourth spot, so we're not lopsided, you know. So here we go with Andy. Go ahead, Andy.
Well, I basically I had tried to get a band going in Memphis and get something going musically, and it was just like pulling teeth, man. I just couldn't get anybody motivated to do anything. couldn't get the band booked. The music store I worked at was going out of business, and I was in a real bad marriage. So everything was just kind of like not looking very good at the time, you know. And the first week of January, a friend of mine, Jim Stanford, who Jim and Joe were two of the original guys at Shoto when they started, like late 60s, you know, early 70s. And Joe left and went to Memphis, and Jim went to Texas, and he ended up in Memphis. Well, Jim walks in one day and says, Andy, he said, how's your life going? I just kind of sneered at him. I said, Jim, I said, you don't want to know. I said, how my life's going. I said, it sucks, you know. He said, well, how would you like to change it? I said, well, what do you got in mind? He said, they're looking for a third member sound crew guy on the Skynyrd tour. They're doing their first headlining tour. And I had met them, I think they opened for Bob Seger, I think, in like 73 maybe. And I met Leon, Billy, and the original drummer. And we just talked for a while, you know, and I liked them. I mean, they reminded me of guys I grew up with in Frazier, you know, just salt of the earth guys, you know. So anyway, I said, I didn't even hesitate. I said, Jim, let's do it. I said, I need a change. I said, I got to make something happen here. So that's what happened. Basically, I spent about a week and a half putting rivets in ample cases. And then we rented a Winnebago in Memphis, and we drove it up. And I think we met you guys in Nashville, I think, if I'm not mistaken. I think we met you guys, the rest of the crew. They all came on board, and pretty much we did about 10 dates, I think, at that time, mostly up in the north and northeast in Canada. And then we took about a week off, 2 weeks off, and then we started the Torture Tour.
What part of time, Andy, was it when that incident with Alan and that the sound started going haywire, and according to Joe Barnes or Joe Osborne, and you determined he was drunk.
Well, yeah, tell us what happened when Chuck come and got you, and they said there was a problem over here, and you need to come look at it.
That was April of '75, I think, first or second week of April. I think we were doing some Texas dates, and I was over. I was over on the side of the stage and standing beside K-Boy, and I'm pretty sure that Billy's wife Stella was with us at the time. I keep thinking she was there. But anyway, Chuck comes over and he leans on my ear and he yells, "Come over here and listen to this, T. Something's going on." I said, "Well, what's happening?" He said, "I can't explain it. Just come over here and listen." So I went over and I got on my knees and I stuck my left ear up to the speakers, and it was just the most god-awful playing ever. I mean, it was just like garbled. He couldn't get the notes. You know, he was missing notes, missing strings. He couldn't do the bends. You know, and I said, "Well, fuck, he's drunk." He's drunk as shit. I mean, it's like, you know, so I was coming back up when Ronnie walked over to that side of the stage, pushed the Fender Twin back, which caught me right there. I was like 110 pounds to it, had JBL speakers in it. I mean, it was a serious hit. And then the Marshall fell forward and hit Ronnie in the head. So Ronnie's walking the stage like a wrestler, you know, bleeding from his head, you know, and they got me to the dressing room and started putting like towels on my head to stop the bleeding. Then Ronnie comes back there and he's all apologetic. And he's yelling at me, "I'm sorry, man. I'm really sorry." Okay. I said, "Okay, yeah, it's okay. Don't worry about it, you know." So they took me to Parkland Memorial, got me about 8 stitches, and Chuck Flowers stayed. They said someone had to stay up with me that night, all night. And Chuck Flowers volunteered to do it because he felt responsible, kind of, you know.
What happened to the show that evening?
This is the last. I was like, this is Freebird. This was they didn't do a second encore back then.
No.
Freebird was the end of it, you know.
What do you think the reason was that Ronnie pushed the amp over on you, though? Was it
because Alan couldn't play,
and so he was kind of distracting from that? Maybe
I think he was just venting. I think, you know.
So
that's
so that kind of ended things, I guess, for that show, right?
Well, I mean, it was they had been they had been partying a little bit more every show, and all those Texas shows were sold out. And promoters are bringing drugs, alcohol, chicks. I mean, you name it. It was like, it was just like, the most decadent thing ever. But they just kept getting blasted almost every night, And that night, Alan drank too much.
Imagine that.
You and I were talking on the phone, and you were telling me, I think it was at the airport, you saw Ronnie, and I think you were with the road crew, and he came over and had a little chat with you about how you shouldn't be a roadie anymore and that you needed to follow your musical career. What happened with that?
Well, rock and roll audio, Joe Osborne and Kevin Elson butted heads all the time. I mean, they argued like kids. I mean, Kevin was impressed with the Clare Brothers Shoko concept of like floating the system, getting it off the stage so you could see a whole lot more people. So people could see the band better. Joe thought it was a stupid idea because he liked the way it sounded on the stage. And they argued about this constantly. And we went and saw Bad Company in Pittsburgh, and it sounded amazing. And I pretty much knew that between Joe and not being able to be flexible or whatever, we were going to get fired. So the last show I did with them was the Tampa Jam in August. And after that was a good show. I mean, but afterwards, the next day, we were all at the airport, and I see the band walking down the hallway, and Ronnie looks over and sees me, and he motions for me to come over and talk to him. So I did, and he took me behind some columns, and he said, T, I'm gonna be real blunt with you. And he said, I don't want to see you back out here doing this shit anymore. I said, doing what? He said, this roadie thing. I don't want to see you out here. He said, you know what you need to be doing, and he said, you should go back to Memphis and get busy. And if I can help you in any way, he said, give me a call and I'll see what I can do for you. And I said, okay. He said, but he looked, he said, T, I'm serious about this. He said, I don't want to see you back out here anymore. I said, if I do, he said, I would kick your ass. Ronnie was like 5'6", maybe 5'7". I'm 6'4". I smiled at him. I said, Ronnie, you can't reach my ass. So he took his fist and just kind of gently got my attention. He said, you know what I'm saying, don't you? And I said, I know what you're saying. He said, all right. And that was the last time I saw him.
Oh, that was the last time you did that. What year was that, you think?
That was August 1975.
75. So you still had a couple years after that he was on the road. And then where did you go after that, Andy? What happened after that?
I went back to Memphis, and again, I was on fire, man, because I loved Ronnie and Gary and Artemis, and they were so inspirational to me. And that conversation with Ronnie that night in the hotel room was probably the most life-changing thing that ever happened to me. Because I wasn't getting any love or support out of Memphis at the time. People thought I was weird and too different, whatever. What he saw in me, I don't know, but it was just it was a revelation to me, because he told me he loved my voice. I played the original for him. He loved the original. And after that, they just sort of took me under their wing, I guess, and supported me. And we even talked about doing a publishing deal at one time. Gary and I did. So it was a life-changing experience for the better. And it got me serious about playing music again. But when I came back to Memphis, I couldn't get anybody else on the same page I was. Everybody had a drug or alcohol problem or just was lazy. And I just couldn't get anything done. Next thing you know, I'm doing heroin, I'm doing coke, I'm drinking too much. I'm just like, my priorities have shifted, and I'm just kind of out there floundering. But long story short, Memphis Police Department politely asked me to leave town in May of 75, early June 75. And so I went up. There was a guy named Mike Lancaster who owned the trucks that carried all the Skynyrd stuff, the PA gear and everything. And Mike invited me up to his farm because he was managing this stripper out of Nashville named Heaven Lee. He told me he needed someone to run lights and sound for her and be a babysitter, basically. And so I went up to his place and met her and went to work for her for a couple of days. And then she and Mike fell out at Mike's farm. You remember Mike's farm, Craig? In Hitchton, Wisconsin, where we played softball?
Oh, yeah. Mike Lancaster, the trucking guy. Yeah. Porky. We called him Porky.
Porky, yeah. He had a huge farm up in Hitchton, Wisconsin. And he had a baseball field, like a full-on baseball field. And we all went out there and played softball all afternoon.
The next day was Chicago, and we all none of us could move.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I remember that well.
Yeah,
we had a blast out there. The whole city was there watching us play softball. It was really cool. Yeah, there's pictures of that.
It was really cool. Yeah. Long story short, I ended up in Nashville with the stripper, and I'm like a house guest, and I'm like a chauffeur. I'm running errands for her, whatever. She's trying to help me get into the music thing in Nashville. Is
she the same woman I knew?
I don't think so, unless you knew him.
Wasn't there a story about there was a woman that you knew that knew me that was on the road? Somebody told me that story.
My first wife.
That I had made up a song that I used to sing about.
Oh, you're talking about Hedy.
Yeah. I used to sing some song, and you ran into the girl that I sang that song about.
You moved in with her in Hollywood or something, Hollywood County.
Yeah, that was like after the Black Oak thing had died out, and I moved to LA, and I was in a band with the guy who plays guitar for REO Speedwagon now, and it was me and Jimi Henderson and a drummer named Danny McBride, and we couldn't get anything going on, so that died. So I'm stuck in Hermosa Beach. I don't have a place to live. I don't have a job. I don't have any money. And I called this friend of mine named Charlene, who was on the road with Black Oak when we first started that '79 tour. And I called her, and she said, well, you can stay here if you want to, just help out with the rent. I said, cool. So I moved in with her. On Quaaludes one night, I walked in the door. I don't know what I was thinking or whatever, but I went straight to her bed, got naked, and climbed into the bed with her. And so we started up this like little interlude thing, I guess, whatever, and then we were sitting around one night. Sitting around talking one night, and she starts bragging. We're both on Quaaludes, drinking too much, and she said, Andy, she said, I was so fucking good at blowjobs back then. I was legendary among people. And I said, well, I'm surprised I never heard from you. I never heard about you. And she said, well, I was so legendary they gave me a name. I said, what was that? They called me Hedy. And I spit beer out of my mouth. And I looked at her and I said, you're Hedy?
Oh, Jesus. That's
So what happened early on that tour, Craig was standing in the doorway where the bunks are. We were all in the cabin section. And he was standing in the doorway singing this silly song about Hedy. And I looked at, and he had done this several times before. And I said, Craig, what is the deal with Hedy? He said, oh my God, T, best blowjob you'll ever have in your whole life. I said, really? He said, I promise you, it's the best. So I looked over at Chuck and Joe and Kevin. I said, is he right? They said, oh, absolutely. She's the greatest ever. So
do you remember how the song goes?
Beg your pardon?
You remember how the song goes?
No, because he changed it every time he sang it. I mean, he kept adding to it. It was like,
he still does that. He still changed it. Yeah.
But I just spoke with her the other day, and I told her I was going to be doing this podcast, and
wow.
asked her to listen. But Charlene was wonderful, man. She was just, and I got to tell you, man, everything Craig and them said about her was right on. I mean,
happy to hear that.
She was amazing. She was
Paul, you never met her, Paul?
No. No, Lord, no.
Paul was
But
telling us that story about Sweet Connie, how, you know, they asked did he know her? And he said, no, I don't know her. And then he saw her somewhere on the road. She said, hey, pal, how's it going?
Yeah, right. I mean, as soon as I set foot off the bus, said, hey, Paul. I'm like, oh, my God.
They said,
Hey,
"You,
so,
Paul, do you know Sweet Connie?" No, I don't know her. He got off the bus and she said, "Hey, Paul."
Andy,
so,
I met her on the
Andy,
Black Oak tour. I'm sorry.
how did you get hooked up with Black Oak, Arkansas?
Well, that's what I was leading up to. That thing in Nashville with the stripper fell apart. I'm basically starving up there. I think when I came home from Nashville back to Memphis, I think I weighed 135 pounds or something. I mean,
That's normal. That's normal weight for Craig, by the way.
not for me.
quite.
Not being 6'4", that's not good. So I went back home and I moved in with my parents. And my mom said, you know, she said, you've been through the mill, son. She said, I think it's better for you to just back up and regroup and figure out what it is you want to do. So I just said, I'm going to be a normal guy for a while. I got a job at a stereo store, and I was happy there. I really, I mean, I worked with really good people. I had a lot of fun, made some money for the first time in years, and it was all great. And then the last week of December, I went to a party, and this girl who played bass for Tracy Nelson came up to me and said, she said, I just got to tell you something. She said, you have this incredible aura about you. And I looked at her and I didn't know what an aura was. So I asked, I said, okay. I said, what's an aura? She said, it's like a glow. And I said, okay. She said, would you mind if I do a reading on you? And I said, well, what's a reading? She said, it's astrological reading. I said, well, yeah, that's fine. You know, I said, is it going to cost me anything? She said, no. So I gave her my date of birth, where I was living, all this stuff. Long story short, she said, you're going to be receiving an offer very soon, doing what you love to do. You're very good at it. And it's not going to be long term. It's going to be a short-lived thing, but it's going to open doors for things down the road for you. And I said, okay. A week later, Mac Holder calls me at the stereo store and says, Andy, said, I've been looking for you for 4 months now. He said, and he said, how would you feel about coming up to audition for Black Oak, Arkansas? And I didn't know what to say. I said, are you serious? He said, yeah, I'm serious, you know. And so I went up and got the audition. I played with Tommy Aldridge and got the audition. I started like a week later.
Yeah, we were talking, that was after Ruby Starr had left. Was she still in it then?
Yeah, she got a solo deal with Capitol. I want to say 75, maybe 77. She put out 2 records, and it never really took off for her like it should have. I mean, I loved Ruby. I thought she was talented. I loved her voice, but it just never really took off for her.
So you mentioned Jimmy Henderson, old friend of mine.
Really?
Yeah, he lived in Jackson, Mississippi. Played with Johnny Walker and all those guys.
Sorry?
Yeah, I knew him for a long time.
Who did he play with? I'm sorry.
Jimmy Henderson played with Black Oak.
Yeah, you said he was from Pearl, Mississippi. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was. I was living in Atlanta, and him and one of his buddies, Johnny Crocker, came out there, and George Allen.
Oh my gosh! Yeah.
They had a band called Sassy Jones.
Yeah.
That they were playing in.
Right.
And they were trying to go down to Macon to see if they could get them a deal and all this kind of stuff. Never happened. But the next thing I heard was that Jimmy had gone with Black Oak.
Well, actually, he started with Ruby. He did a couple of tours with Ruby, and that's when when Harvey Jett found Jesus and quit. Tommy Aldridge stepped up and said, you know, you really should think about using Jimmy Henderson. And Jimmy and I were friends for like 39 years before he died in 2018.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were like best friends for like 39 years, you know.
Good guy, man. I always loved hanging out with him.
Oh yeah.
Did you know
a lot of fun.
his other bandmates?
Beg pardon?
Did you know any of his other bandmates from Jackson and
Jimmy told me stories about guys like Johnny Crocker, Chalmers Davis, and
exactly.
A guy named Daryl Gunner. There was a guy named Daryl Gunner that was supposed to be like the greatest guitar player in that area. Jimmy told me stories about all these guys, you know, for years.
Yeah. All of them were friends of mine.
Is that right?
From way back.
Okay.
Hey, Andy, in touring with Black Oak, anything in particular that strikes your memory as far as anything happening that pretty memorable as far as being on tour with Black Oak?
I was 22 years old when I joined that band. I turned 23 in March of '77. The only way that I got the Black Oak gig was because of the Skynyrd guys, because I watched them like a hawk. Everything they did, the way they did things, the way they rehearsed. I mean, I watched them just as closely as anybody can. And so I pretty much knew what to do if I ever got into a situation like that. I knew how to behave. I knew how to conduct myself, you know, and how to work the stage. I mean, just from watching those guys, you know, for those 88 shows. So that's kind of what got me in the door, but I was still a rookie. I mean, you know, but next thing I know, we're doing a record, and it did pretty well. We're on tour with Blue Oyster Cult and Cheap Trick and a bunch of others. And then the second year, it died a horrible death.
That was on that last album that you played on, right?
I'd Rather Be Sailing. Yeah, that's like the worst record ever. It's like a horrible piece of work, you know.
And I watched that performance. I've reposted that on Facebook. What Griff posted, the performance you did on Midnight Special.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that was really. You posted a little bit of it, just the first part. You said your mother, you were making these faces, but Griff went in and found the whole thing. It's pretty extensive, but. You're right. I was really impressed with the way you moved around the stage, and you jumped off the drum riser and stuff. You were good, man. I listened to all your bass licks through that, man.
That bass sounded great on that.
Yeah, you were good, man.
Very
man. It's like, you know, when you jam with guys like Artemis, you know, and Tommy Aldridge and guys like that. I mean, you just you want to be at your best.
When did you start? I mean, you knew bass and you knew a guitar too, as well, as far as, you know, 6-string. What made you go with the bass? Is it just you were better at that, or is that what they needed?
1970 or 71. It's like I saw myself as a guitar player, but I hooked up with this guy named Richard, who was like 10 times better than I was, and I was humiliated. Because he just ran circles around me, and I didn't know half as much as he did. So it was hard to find a bass player where I grew up at. So I switched over to bass, and my mom bought me a Rickenbacker bass with a Sun amp, and I started playing in bands around like 71, 72 maybe.
That's almost like the Ed King story, isn't it, Paul?
Yeah, a lot like it.
Yeah, Ed King kind of did the same thing, I think, you know, and then whenever he hooked up with Skynyrd, they needed a bass player, and Ronnie said he sucked.
I liked Ed's bass playing. I mean, I think he has really good lines, and that I don't think that first record would be as iconic as it is if it hadn't been for those bass lines. You know,
I agree.
But apples to apples, Leon was a much better bass player. Leon was solid. He played well, good phrasing, good choice of lines. I mean, he just enhanced everything that they wrote. You know, he just took it a step higher.
Yeah, you kind of looked like Leon in that Midnight Special. You must pick some tips up from him on that, because you kind of had that.
I watched those guys like a hawk. I'm serious. I mean, because it was amazing to me how big that band got so fast.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that first album comes out in 73. Next thing you know, they're touring with The Who. A year after that, they're headlining, and they're 2 hit records. you know, 2 great albums out, and they were just unstoppable during that time. And I needed to be around that. I mean, I needed to be around consummate pros that knew what they were doing and didn't fuck around and were lazy or shiftless or unmotivated like I was running into. And it was inspiring, man. It really was. It was a life-changing experience.
So after that Black Oak, Arkansas, that last album that you said it tanked, then you got hooked up with Crocus. I remember you telling me that at first you didn't really care to have anything to do with them. They were a little bit too freaky or something.
They were too dark. They were real kind of demonic stuff, you know, and I didn't go along with that. So that was 83. That was like 4 years after the last tour I did with Black Oak in 79. And
I'm sorry, where was Crocus from?
Switzerland.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they were Swiss band. And they were pretty much on fire during that time. I mean, they hadn't had a hit record, but consistently they kept putting out decent albums, you know. And they asked me to join in 83, and I didn't really even have to think about it. I just told them, I said, you know, I think it's just too dark for me. I said, I'm going to end up dying in a fucking plane crash or something. You know, so it's just better if I shy away from that. They called me a year later and said, we want you to come join. And we changed our image. We're much more lighthearted now. They jumped on that Van Halen bandwagon is what they did. You know, the Van Halen Twisted Sister, Rat, Quiet Riot thing, you know. Yeah, so they jumped on that bandwagon. That's kind of when I came in. I flew to New York, auditioned with them in July of 84. The next day, I'm shooting the Ballroom Blitz video.
Wow.
I'd never done a video before. I'd never done a video. That was life-changing as well.
Do you have that video up on your page? Is it?
It's Ballroom Blitz on YouTube. Crocus Ballroom Blitz on YouTube. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, Craig, did you want to get into some questions on here?
Yeah, why don't we do that? Yeah.
Okay. We were talking when we first came on, and Craig was mentioning the way that Skynyrd got started into Peavey, and then Brandon Campbell, he's a pretty knowledgeable guy on electronics and amps and things like that. He's actually a historian when it comes to Lynyrd Skynyrd stuff, and he asked that first question here. So there's a lot of fans who are interested in why Skynyrd switched to Peavey equipment for their back line in 1975. I believe Andy is one of the people who went out to Peavey and Meridian. Yeah. And on behalf of the band, I'd like to hear him talk about that experience.
That was another pivotal week for me, because we had, I think, 5 days off, and I was back in Memphis. Kevin Elson calls me at home and says, listen, I'm working with this band tonight at Shoe Productions. He said, why don't you come down and hang out? He said, and bring your bass. He loved that Rickenbacker bass I played. He loved it. And I said, oh, cool, you know. So I went down, and Kevin was producing like the real early 38 Special stuff. Back when Donnie was singing, and they did this song called "I'm a Country Man" or something. I think they cut that and a couple of others, and I got to be friends with the guys in 38 Special. And then 2 days later, Joe calls me and says, Andy, we're going down to Meridian, Mississippi. I want you to go with me. I said, okay, who's going? He said, me and you and Kevin. So we drove down to Meridian, met Hartley. He took us out to dinner, wined and dined us, you know, and he was a really genuine person. I mean, I liked him because he didn't, he owned that company. He never went public with that company, as big as they were back then. And I think he kept everything in his wife's name, I think, to make sure that nobody could come in and take over. But he was just real down to earth. He even made this comment. We drove past the country club, and he said, if you look on your left, gentlemen, he said, this is the Meridian Country Club, of which I am not a member. You know, we all just laughed. So he took us back to Peavey, And there was like one room. It's like a research and development room. And there were like early Mesa Boogies in there, Marshalls, Fenders. Everything had been torn down, and Hartley wanted to see how these things worked. And basically, Kevin started talking about the endorsement deal. Kevin was very impressed by him, and he was impressed by the quality of the stuff he was making at the time. So they signed the deal, but that didn't happen. I think they stuck with what they had until the next year, I think, like late 75, early 70. When they got back from Europe in 75, I think that's when they made the switch over to Peavey.
Yeah, I had a question. It was about working with Jim Dandy Magnus. You guys were talking earlier about how David Lee Roth had stolen his wardrobe. You said you were there when the two met. You want to talk about that?
Well, there was a few people that kind of topped what Jim was doing. Say what you will about Jim. Not one of the greatest vocalists that ever lived, but he was original. And he was a monster stage performer. He was every bit as good as Jagger or any of those guys back then. Paul Rogers. He just very charismatic, and had a huge fan. But
I loved his voice. I really did. I thought he had a great voice. Matter of fact, I was a Black Oak, Arkansas fan. Oh my God, back probably 72. Maybe something like that. I saw Peter Frampton and Black Oak, Arkansas, in a great big outdoor show. And
you were the only guy on that tour that liked that band at the time. I didn't know enough about them to say whether I liked them or not, but I did know that Ronnie and most of the crew members hated them.
I loved Jim Dandy do the rescue. Go, Jim Dandy, go. I loved that, man.
He was original. I'll give him that. So anyway,
I like how sitting on a mountaintop.
So 78, we're doing the Tulsa Jam that summer, and Van Halen's on the bill. And our tour manager, Ronnie Stone, comes in and says, guys, the guys in Van Halen want to come in and meet you and shake hands. I said, cool. So they walk in, and we all get together and we shake hands and say, hi, how you doing? And then David Lee Roth walks over to Jim. Now, this had already been a subject of conversation about how Roth had stolen blatantly what Jim was doing, So anyway, so Roth walks over to him, and he's got his head down. He can't even look at Jim. He shakes his hand, and Jim looks at him and says, nice look. David Lee Roth, he can't even look at it. He says, yeah, well, you know how it is. Jim said, yeah, I know how it is.
It is pretty suspect. Spot on, right?
Yeah. So there was a lot of tension. It was awkward and very tense. You could cut it with a knife. And then they left and said goodbye. Really nice guys, though.
Have you been in touch with any of those guys? I don't know how many's left. I know Jim Dandy, he's still alive, but you said he's not doing well.
Things didn't end well with me and Jim.
Yeah.
And I just try to avoid him like the plague now. So
okay.
But
I'm just reading.
Jimmy and I were best friends for 39 years. I'm still friends with Joel, the drummer. Greg Redding, I'm still friends with him. Jimmy died, Jack Holder died. So, but I haven't talked to Jim since 1996, maybe 97, 98. I'm sorry, 1998. Yeah.
Yeah. I was just going down this list of questions here, and I got one for Craig. Craig, how long has it been since you've attended a Skynyrd show?
You know what? It was what is it? I used to work when I come off the road from working with Skynyrd. I belonged to local 48 for a long time, and I'd go work whatever shows I wanted to work. So I saw, it was, I don't know, 6 years ago or something like that. I went and saw him, and it was real cool. Johnny had me catch the microphone stand, and I went out and caught the caught the garage slide and caught the mic stand, and it was real cool. And then the next year, I think I went and tried to work the show, and their manager saw me trying to work and trying to make some money, and he went to the union steward and told him he wanted me to go home.
What?
He didn't want me there.
I knew that'd touch on Paul.
And the union steward said, he's here to work. He's not here to talk to the band or you or anybody. I'm not sending him home. He'll just, he just won't see him. I'll make sure he doesn't see him, so just don't worry about it. So then the next year, I think afterward, I worked the show again, and they were really apprehensive to ask me to work. And I said, no, it's cool. I said, Gary and Johnny didn't know anything about that. It was totally management. It's just, whatever. So then they said, okay. So I was going across the stage doing the set change, and Tom Fisher saw me, and he said, Craig, come here, and I went over, and Johnny saw me, and Johnny come up and, hey, Craig, and then Gary saw me, and he come over and said, man, I love you, man. That made me feel real good, and then we talked for a while, and then I was standing outside waiting to go for the band to come off, because we have to stand outside and to go in, because I was just part of the crew. So they came up, and Johnny come up and was singing to me like I used to wake up the band on the bus on the phone. Paul can attest to that. I'd wake them up singing "Strangers in the Night" and stuff, and he was laughing. And then Gary come off stage, and he said, "Man, I love you, man," And then Ricky come off, and I talked to him. It was real cool. So that was the last time. About I don't know, a couple years ago. A couple years ago.
Hey, Andy, have you ever called and got Craig's voicemail and listened to it?
He's always answered the phone.
Somewhere over the rainbow?
No, he's always answered the phone whenever we called.
I don't know. They used to do mic checks, and I remember a few times with K-Boy, I'd get up and we'd be in New York City in the Central Park or something, and we'd crank up the PA to do a sound check, and I'd get up and sing some Frank Sinatra songs on the microphone all over Central Park and stuff. I'm in the mood for love.
Yeah, Craig will get on the phone and you think he's going to stop, but he sings the whole song.
Oh, sure.
Well,
I don't know why I know all those old crooner songs.
That last question came from Chris Godwin, and this next question was we got a friend named Kathy Keeble, and she came and visited Craig, and he took her granddaughter, right, Craig, to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
She's a bass player, and so she's asking Andy.
Samantha
she started playing bass, and she's got a question. For somebody first starting out, do you have any advice?
Practice.
Savannah. I said Savannah. I'm sorry. That's her name. Savannah. I'm sorry. I got her name. I'm sorry. I would interrupt you. Go ahead.
That's okay. No, I basically tell people just starting out who ask me about stuff like that, I just tell them basically do it because you love it. Don't chase money or fame or any of that stuff. Do it because you love it, and dedicate yourself to it and practice. That's the best three things you can do.
Well, maybe Craig can hook her up. He knows a lot of people.
She has improved. She's only been playing for a year, and when I took her up to the Rock Hall of Fame, her and Kathy, she jumped right on the bass and she started playing. And she was dressed like a rock star. Everybody was looking. It was really funny. But the guy that was running the floor, the little exposition there, she caught his eye, and he came over you know, she's you know, don't have a pick, she's just finger picking. And she's really good, you know, and she can hear something and then, you know, repeat it, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, the guy up there at the Rock Hall of Fame, he was really impressed with her. They talked for a long time.
No, it sounds like
yeah, Kathy Godsey, she went out to Colorado today to meet her daughter. I hope she had a safe trip out there. Hey, Kathy Godsey. she'll be on the show this next Wednesday, or maybe the following if we can't organize it with Gene, or she might be on both of them. We haven't decided.
She knew Gene. Gene hooked her up. It's actually an interesting story because she had the album that had the real estate sign, the Lynyrd Skynyrd real estate sign, and had the phone number on it. And she wanted to meet her idol, Alan Collins. So she calls that number, and Lynyrd Skynyrd answered it. And she says, I want to meet Alan. And so he says, well, I know somebody that knows him, and hooked him up with Gene. Andy, did you know Gene Odom?
No, Gene came in the year after.
Yeah.
Yeah, 76.
So he took her over to Alan's house.
Right.
So we're kind of wanting to do a little reunion with her on the next show coming up. But yeah, it's a kind of an interesting story about that. There's got another question for Paul. Something, let's see, James Wooten. Can you ask Paul about the story chasing Gary down from using the phone book to tracking him down in the frozen food section in a grocery store in '83? You know anything about that?
Yeah, that's kind of a long story. I went through it last week, I believe, talking about when I was living in Colorado and Gary was living in Jackson. Well, I was talking to Billy on the phone. He told me that Gary was living in Jackson, Wyoming. So my wife and I went up there, and we just went up there to camp and to, you know, see the sights and everything. And about the third day there, I said, well, you know what, maybe I'll try to get in touch with Gary. And I looked in the phone book, and there was his number. And I called him, talked to Dale. She was glad to hear somebody with a Southern accent. And she said, look, Gary is down at the grocery store. There's only one in town. Go see if you can find him. And so I did, and I tracked him down in the frozen foods. Sure did. But after that, I went up there, you know, many times to visit and hung out with him, and we went out to his honey hole, did some fishing. Just, you know, it was a lot of fun. At that time, there wasn't a lot of pressure on anybody to do anything as far musically. I mean, they were doing the Rossington band, and that's when the tribute tour thing was born, I guess, from that, in that era.
Black Oat had played in Jacksonville in 1979. I want to say it was like maybe early fall of 79. We're staying at the Hilton. My phone rings in my room, and I pick it up, and he says, T, this is Craig Reed. I said, what are you doing, man? So he said, man, I'm coming to get you. I said, what? He said, I'm coming to get you. So I'm going to take you out to where the band's rehearsing. So Craig was driving, I think it was like a light colored Mercedes at the time, I think. So he came and got me, and then we're driving way out in the suburbs somewhere. And we're just catching up and talking, you know, and Craig says, he said, Andy, I got to tell you one thing, man. He said, don't bring up the crash. I said, that would be rude. I said, man, I wouldn't do that in the first place, but I'm just saying, man, just don't bring up the crash. You know, it can get ugly if you do. I said, well, you got my word, man, I won't do it. So, you know, they took, I think it was Alan's house, I think, where they were rehearsing at the time. But anyway, they were out in the garage. I met Dale for the first time at that rehearsal. And Artemis had just had a motorcycle accident and had busted his leg up pretty bad. So I think he was still recovering from that. But we're standing out on the concrete outside of the rehearsal place, the garage they were rehearsing in. And Gary walks up and says, T said it was Ronnie that made us get on that plane. And I looked at Craig, and I felt uncomfortable.
Oh, no.
I looked at Craig like, well, where is this going? You know, I was like, but I didn't say anything. He said, you knew how Ronnie was. And I said, yeah, I did. You know, he said, man, we've been complaining about that plane, man, for a long time. And a lot of us just said we weren't going to get back on it, you know. And then, you know, he said, you know, but, you know, we all listened to Ronnie, and you know what happened, you know. But it was real. He was being real open and transparent about it, you know. And I think it took me and Craig by surprise, because I kept looking at Craig to see his reaction. And we all just got real quiet and listened to him sit there and vent for a few minutes. And that's the last time I saw Jerry.
Now, that was Gary talking?
That was Jerry walked up, and it was me, Craig, one of the guys from the Rossington Collins band. And then Jerry just walks up and just starts talking about that stuff.
Yeah, Billy did that to me. I mean, he went through, it was probably in December following the crash, and we were talking on the phone, and I mean, he went through every detail. Mm-hmm. And I mean, even if I didn't want to hear it, I had to listen. But it was pretty. It was tough to listen to.
I know. I saw Billy the last time at the Horseshoe Casino in Tunica. Played there. He was at a slot machine, and I went over and sat down next to him. We started talking, and one of the first things he said, "You're not going to ask me about the crash, are you?" I said, "No." So, and I had to remind him who I was. You know, the only thing that got his attention that he remembered was the amp on the head. You know, he remembered. He said, He said, "That was you." I said, "That was me." You know, he said, "I remember you now. I remember you now." He said, "They called you T." I said, "Yeah, they called me, T for TANAS." You know, that's the last. I think he died a year later, maybe 2 years later.
Maybe the reason Gary brought
that was an incident that left an impression on everybody's head. It really was. I don't know why everybody remembers that night, but that was one that it was the first time Ronnie ever pushed over an amp stack on.
Well, you're not the only one, Andy. You're not the only one who has a scar from Ronnie, because Joe Barnes has one on his stomach, where Ronnie bit him on the stomach before he tried to throw him off that plane.
He's not the only one that has bite marks on him. I think I'm the only person that escaped the bite marks. He never bit me. He bit Chuck. He bit Gary. He bit Alan. I mean, I think he bit Ed. I don't think he ever bit Kevin.
He was a biter.
I don't think he ever bit Artemis, but
right.
You know.
Well, we probably got time for one more question, so we'll go ahead and throw this one question. I think a lot of people wonder this.
I want to before we go, I want to ask Andy if he remembers the song that he played for Ronnie in the night when he came up to his room. What was? Do you remember the song? What song you played for him?
Bob O'Neill and I were rooming together that night, and we were drinking some beers and getting stoned, and we started singing Neil Young songs, and I knew a whole bunch of them. I mean, I even knew the deep stuff like "Don't Let It Bring You Down" and "After the Gold Rush" and stuff like that. But I think we were playing like "Down by the River" or something, and there's a knock on the door. Bob gets up, goes over to the door, and Ronnie and Jerry walk in, and Jerry says, "Who was that singing?" And Bob said, "That was Andy." Ronnie said, "Was that you, man?" I said, "Yeah." You know, he said, "Well, sing something else for me." He said, "Have you got any originals?" And I had written this song when I was 17 called "I'm Trying," with a drop D tuning. And I played that one for him, and they lost their mind. I mean, this was all new to me. I mean, nobody had ever made a big deal about what I did up to that point. You know, and when the next book I'm writing, I mean, it goes into a lot of detail about how just inspiring that night was, you know. But he kept making a big deal about my voice and the way I played and the way I sang, and it was just overwhelming to me, you know, from that point. So that's kind of how it happened.
Wow.
Cool story.
I even taught the song to Ronnie. I taught it to him, you know.
That leads me into the question I was going to ask. Brian Gibbons asked, did Ronnie ever play guitar? Which, you know, Craig said no, but I don't know if you guys.
He played a little bit. He played kind of like Johnny does. I think Johnny's probably better than Ronnie now. I don't.
Ronnie knows one chord.
There was one on my films. I took a film of Ronnie was in the dressing room playing on Steve's Strat, just kind of strumming a little bit. I don't think he was much of a guitar player.
That night in the room, right before they left, I offered the guitar to him to play, and neither one of them, you know, wanted to do it. They wanted to go back to their rooms. Yeah, it was crazy. I mean, it was like the most life-changing thing I've ever been through, you know.
That's pretty cool.
Just for the record, Paul, I mean, Jimmy did talk about you back then.
Talked about me?
He mentioned your name several times.
Oh, wow.
That's the first thing I thought of when Paul Abrahams is going to be on the show. I said, I know that name from somewhere.
Yeah.
And when you said you knew Jimmy, that made sense, you know.
Yeah, Jimmy was a great guy, man. I still talk. There's a friend of his in Jackson that we talk about Jimmy all the time.
Is that right?
We do, yeah.
Who's that?
Well, Johnny Crocker. Of course, we talked about him a minute ago. George Allen was a bass player.
Right.
And George died, oh, God, probably 10 years ago now, maybe a little longer than that. But
you know what? Ralph Ezel came out of that.
Yeah.
Bass player for Shenandoah. Yeah, he came out of that group, yeah. Yeah,
sure did. I mean, I don't know if you remember or if you ever heard the name Bud Cockrell.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, Bud played with It's a Beautiful Day and with Pablo Cruz.
Yeah.
He came out of that crew, too.
Yeah, there was a guitar player from Memphis and It's a Beautiful Day. I can't remember his name, though, but he joined.
Yeah, I can't remember either. Whoop, did we freeze up?
No, we're still good.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Paul's working on his cell phone on this show. His internet went down, and he's doing his cell phone. It looks pretty good though.
Must be an iPhone. It must be an iPhone.
Hell no, man! It's a Samsung.
Get out of here! All right,
$50 Samsung, buddy. And when it wears up, I'll go get another one.
That's a good video for
not bad.
Yeah.
Craig, you got anything else?
No, man. I think we're good.
Yeah, hey, it was great having Andy on here. I mean, a lot of great stories. We'd like to get you back. I know you got some more stories in there, and
I just wrote a book about a lot of it. So I just finished my first book. You know,
anything you're doing now you want to talk about, Andy? That you're doing now?
Well, you know, the last time I played in a band was like 2004, I think, and a year later I started doing this solo acoustic thing, and that's kind of morphed into like a one-man band kind of thing, you know, with like a lot of percussion and stuff, like hitting on guitar and working the strings and tapping and that sort of thing. I've been doing that for 17 years now, and that's been paying the bills and keeping me alive for a long time.
Do you use the looper with it and everything? No, just one man show, huh?
No effects whatsoever.
That's great.
That's great.
Yeah. All right, Craig, I guess we're finished here, and it was like great having everybody on again. And next week we're going to try to put the another guest on here. We're not sure who it's going to be, but we're looking forward to next week. So, Craig, you got your clicker?
Got it right here. All right. That was the Stone Roadie show number 27, and we'll call that one a wrap and cut.
Thanks, guys. We'll see y'all next week.
George, seeing you, Andy.
Nice to meet you. Finally good to see you, Paul. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. I live in Cleveland, Mississippi. We need to get together sometime.
And I'm down there all the time, you know.
Oh, by the way, we're off, right?
No, not yet. It's a wrap.
That's all right.